Donald Trump is shaking things up again, and this time, he's got Canada in his crosshairs. His latest push to rewrite the rules of trade is causing serious waves, threatening to upend a decades-old economic partnership. For years, the US and Canada have been like business partners who depend on each other. Cars, steel, aluminum, these industries have flowed seamlessly between the two countries. Just last year, trade between them hit a jaw-dropping $900 billion, with Canada shipping around $350 billion worth of goods south, including most of its vehicles. But now, things are getting tense, really tense. Canadians are asking, are we even allies anymore? Some are even questioning whether it's time to look beyond the US and strengthen ties with Europe instead. And that's where the real shocker comes in. Trump has thrown a grenade into the mix, threatening to slap a 100% tariff on Canadian-made vehicles and metals. That's not just a warning shot, it's a direct hit to Canada's economy. The US buys over 2 million Canadian-built cars every year, not to mention the steel and aluminum used in everything from skyscrapers to soda cans. But Canada isn't backing down. In fact, they're gearing up for a counterattack. If he wants a fight, he'll get one, a senior official declared, making it clear they won't take this lying down. And the retaliation? It's targeted and personal. A Canadian lawmaker fired back with a bold idea. Slap a 100% tax on Teslas. That's right. The very company led by Elon Musk, who seems to be best buddies with Donald Trump, could find itself in the middle of this escalating trade battle. Our response will be precise, not reckless, they added. But another politician took it even further. If Trump keeps pushing, every Tesla coming into Canada will face a massive tax. Why Tesla? Well, there's a reason for that. Tesla isn't just another car company. It's a powerhouse of American innovation, a leader in the electric vehicle revolution, and a trillion-dollar titan that has reshaped the auto industry. But now, it's also a potential target in a growing trade war. For Canada, Tesla represents more than just a symbol of US business success. It's a strategic bargaining chip. Why? Because Tesla isn't just selling cars north of the border, it's deeply invested in Canada's supply chain. Every year, tens of thousands of Canadians buy Teslas. In 2024 alone, over 50,000 Tesla vehicles were sold in Canada, thanks in part to generous government rebates and a strong push for greener transportation. But if Canada slaps a 100% tariff on Teslas, that would double the price overnight, turning a $50,000 Model Y into a $100,000 luxury item, far beyond the reach of most buyers. That alone would be a massive blow to Tesla's expansion in North America. But the impact goes even deeper. Tesla isn't just selling cars in Canada, it needs Canada. The company has been eyeing the country's rich reserves of lithium and nickel, two essential materials for making EV batteries. In fact, Tesla has already secured agreements with Canadian suppliers to source these key minerals. Without them, the company's entire battery production strategy could be thrown into chaos. Even Elon Musk himself has acknowledged Canada's importance, once calling the country a game changer for Tesla's supply chain. But now that advantage could turn into a liability if Canada decides to pull the plug. A senior Canadian official made the country's stance crystal clear. Tax our cars? Fine. We'll cut off your battery metals and sell them elsewhere. Maybe to Europe, maybe to China. This isn't just a bluff. Canada is one of the world's top producers of nickel, lithium, and cobalt, all of which are essential for EV batteries. If Tesla loses access to those resources, it could be forced to look for less stable suppliers, driving up costs and creating serious production delays. But here's the big question. Can Canada afford to walk away from the US and shift its trade focus to Europe? On the surface, it sounds risky. The US isn't just Canada's biggest trading partner, it's also its most convenient. The two countries share a 5,500-mile border, making trade smooth, fast, and cost-effective. Take auto manufacturing, for example. A car part made in Ontario can be in Detroit within hours. That's why nearly 75% of Canada's exports, worth around $450 billion a year, head straight to the US. Swapping that out for Europe, that's a logistical nightmare. Shipping to Europe is expensive and slow. A container heading from Halifax to Rotterdam takes 2 weeks, far longer than a quick truck trip to New York or Michigan. And the costs? Thousands of dollars more per shipment. Then there's the competition. Europe already has its own car giants: Volkswagen, BMW, Renault. They aren't exactly waiting for Canadian imports when they have plenty of homegrown options. The same goes for metals. European manufacturers already source many materials from places like Norway and Russia. But that doesn't mean Canada is out of options. Back in 2017, it signed a major trade deal with the European Union, called the Comprehensive Economic and Trade Agreement, CETA. This deal has already eliminated 98% of tariffs on Canadian goods entering the EU, making trade far easier. Since it took effect, Canadian exports to Europe have jumped by 30%. And in 2024 alone, trade between the two hit $60 billion. That's a big deal. Unlike the US, which is moving toward protectionist policies like tariffs, Europe is an open, stable market with 450 million consumers. For Canada, that's an appealing alternative. With this in mind, Canadian officials are signaling they aren't afraid to pivot. Local media is already hyping up the possibility, with one headline boldly declaring, "We're not trapped. Plan B is in place." The message is clear. Canada isn't going to sit back and take the hit. If Trump wants to escalate this trade war, Canada is ready to fight back. And if that means turning to Europe instead of the US, well, the groundwork has already been laid. European leaders are taking notice. Some are even calling Canada's trade strategy a welcome alternative to Trump's aggressive tariff tactics. Take steel, for example. Since Canada signed its trade agreement with the EU, more than 1 million tons of Canadian steel has flowed into Europe. And there's more in the works. Plans for green steel projects are gaining traction. The EU is pushing for low-carbon production, and Canada's rich mineral resources could be key to making it happen. But while Europe presents new opportunities, it's not an easy fix. Switching from the US to the EU isn't as simple as flipping a switch. For one, shipping costs to Europe are 3 times higher than sending goods to Chicago. Then there are the regulatory hurdles. Many Canadian car parts would need modifications just to meet European standards. And let's not forget competition. Europe already has its own steel giants in Poland and Sweden, while Spain's auto industry is no lightweight either. Canadian goods won't just slide in without a fight. Even so, Canada is playing the long game. The real ace up Canada's sleeve? Minerals. Europe's electric vehicle industry is hungry for lithium, cobalt, and nickel, all essential for battery production. And guess who has massive reserves of those minerals? Canada. Quebec's James Bay region alone holds a goldmine of resources needed to power the next generation of EVs. With tariff-free access through its trade deal with the EU, Canada has a compelling case. "We're not turning our backs on the US," a trade expert in Ottawa explained. "But we want them to know we have options. Europe is our safety net." And that's exactly why Tesla has landed right in the middle of this economic showdown. Tesla isn't just a symbol of American innovation, it's also heavily tied to Canada. For years, Canada has supplied Tesla with raw materials while also being a major buyer of its electric cars. If a 100% tariff hits, the impact would be brutal. Picture this: a Tesla dealership in Toronto with cars stacking up because nobody can afford them. A $50,000 Model Y would suddenly cost $100,000, pricing most Canadians out of the market. Meanwhile, Tesla's US factories, like the one in Michigan, could find themselves scrambling for nickel that's now being shipped to Germany instead. But the fallout wouldn't stop with Tesla. The entire North American auto sector depends on seamless trade between Canada, the US, and Mexico. Under the USMCA, the new NAFTA, steel, aluminum, and car parts move freely across borders every single day. Here's how deep it goes. Canada exports $15 billion in auto parts to the US every year, feeding factories in places like Ohio and Tennessee. Mexico builds 3 million cars a year, many using Canadian steel. Ford, GM, and Chrysler all rely on these supply chains to keep costs down. A 100% tariff would throw a wrench into all of it. Suddenly, a $30,000 SUV could jump to $40,000 overnight. American buyers would feel the pinch, while Canadian factory towns, places like Oshawa, could face mass layoffs. And that's not even the worst of it. If supply chains start breaking down, Mexico gets hit too. Without Canadian steel, its auto industry suffers, and the whole USMCA agreement could start to unravel. At the end of the day, both sides stand to lose. US consumers might wonder why their cars are suddenly way more expensive. Canadian workers could be left asking why their factories shut down. Why did my truck just cost me an extra $10,000? An Ohio driver might ask. Because our plants got shut down, a Windsor auto worker might reply. But Trump's camp insists that this is about protecting American jobs and keeping resources at home. Canada, on the other hand, sees it as economic strong-arming. And they're making it clear, if we're backed into a corner, we'll take our business elsewhere. So if the US keeps turning the screws, where does Canada go next? Asia? Not likely. Japan and Korea are too far, and China doesn't have a free trade deal with Canada. Europe? That's the real alternative. With CETA in place, the EU has already eliminated tariffs and streamlined regulations for Canadian goods. The doors are wide open. Canada isn't waiting around, it's already shifting gears, ramping up exports of metals to Europe, and eyeing the next big move: auto parts. Picture this: BMW rolling out cars with Canadian steel from Nova Scotia, or French EV companies fueling their batteries with lithium from Thunder Bay. It's a bold shift, but one that could make sense if US trade barriers keep piling up. Of course, Europe isn't as easy a market as the US. Shipping across the Atlantic takes weeks, not hours, and costs can skyrocket. But in a world where trade relationships are changing fast, having an alternative market is a lifeline. And here's where things get really interesting. Europe and Canada are natural allies when it comes to green technology. The EU is on a massive climate push, looking for cleaner ways to produce steel and more sustainable battery materials. Canada has exactly what they need. If the US doubles down on tariffs, Canada and Europe could forge a whole new partnership, one that leaves America on the sidelines. This isn't just about Canada versus the US anymore. If Trump pushes too hard, Europe could step in, fast-tracking new trade deals with Canada to counterbalance American influence. A high-ranking official in Brussels even hinted at the possibility, saying, "We're prepared to move quickly on negotiations." And it's not just Canada that could pivot. Mexico is watching closely too. If the US continues making trade harder, Mexico could also start looking toward Europe, cracking the foundation of North America's tight-knit economy. Canada's strategy is clear. It's playing the long game. Global trade is shifting, and Canada's making sure it won't be left behind. That doesn't mean cutting ties with the US entirely. Proximity is still an advantage, with a staggering $2.5 billion worth of goods crossing the border every single day. But Europe is a real backup plan, even if it's not a perfect one. Competition is tough, shipping costs are high, and the US market is still the biggest game in town. Still, Canada isn't backing down. One official put it bluntly: "Don't count us out. We have options." Trade wars rarely have winners. They leave everyone hurting. Prices spike, factories struggle, and industries take a hit. We've seen this movie before. Back in 2018, Trump slapped steel tariffs on Canada, and Ottawa fired back with retaliatory tariffs on $12 billion worth of American goods, including everything from whiskey to ketchup. It took months of economic standoff before both sides finally compromised. Could the same thing happen again? Maybe the US scales back its threat, settling for a 25% tariff instead of 100%, while Canada drops the Tesla tax and both sides walk away claiming victory. Or maybe the fight drags on and Tesla, consumers, and the entire auto industry pay the price. So, is Canada serious about shifting to Europe? Or is this just a high-stakes bluff to get Trump to back off?